So, Martin Stewart-Weeks, thank you for joining us on the IPA 2019 Annual Forum podcast series.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
As MC today, Martin, what are some of your thoughts? How do you feel the day went today?
I thought it was great. First of all, numbers are always a good sign, right? So you've got over 300 people in the room here. You've got 150 plus virtually in 4 other locations. So we're kind of nudging 500 people. Generally speaking, that's a sign that you're onto something and that you're probably talking about something that matters to them.
So having that regional connection, you think, was actually
huge.
good?
I've done this before with a couple of IPA events here, and because Queensland is Queensland, it's a very, very distributed state, and we don't just like to focus on the southeast. Absolutely critical, I think, and the fact that it's picked up by 150 plus people is a good sign.
So do you think we got a bit closer today to figuring out what steps the sector really needs to take in order to progress some of these public value and community outcomes?
I think we did. I think the thing that struck me particularly were the 2 case studies, right? One from Toowoomba and the other one from Cairns. Because what that reminded people was that this is a conversation that's not just a conversation. This is clearly beginning to infect the way that public service works in this state in a very good way, and is changing the nature of the way we use the resources and the assets and the expertise in the public sector to connect with other resources and assets in the community for big, important public outcomes. So yeah, I think we've got some very clear messages about how to do that and how to do it well.
Did you have any other, if we dare say, a top 5? We've had a couple of case studies, and that did seem to resonate. It's come up with a lot of our speakers here on the podcast as well. What were some other
a few
highlights?
things that stood out for me. I think one issue is around time. I think this process, if you're going to build it, takes time because it's built on trust and it's built on a real sense of empathy. That can sometimes be a challenge in the public service because we know politics and the political process can sometimes not give us very much time. So that's one thing I heard a lot about. Another thing I heard a lot about was this idea really that sometimes you've got to get going in order to find out what's going to work. In other words, you can't sit around for too long researching and thinking and trying to get it all perfect before you start. Sometimes you've just got to get going, do a few trials, take some experiments, learn quickly, circle back, try something different. But the idea of getting going and doing something as a way of learning, I think is really powerful. I really enjoyed that.
And reinvigorating public purpose. I mean, this has been a passion of your life.
It has.
Did you feel that today?
No, I think it's a coming thing. I mean, I was very taken by Annabelle Crabb's analysis of the political environment at the moment, which is, let's say it's fairly fraught. But I think it's very open, in fact, for, if you like, a bottom-up community-based movement of people with government at and in the process, not leading the process all the time, to actually start creating new forms of trust and public impact without waiting for governments always to lead the way. Because frankly, at the moment, I suspect in many cases they won't. But they're not averse to being asked to come along on a journey that can often be curated and grounded in and of communities. And I think that's very hopeful.
So it sounds like this event has gone some way to creating that awareness about how people need to work better across those sectors and those traditional boundaries. We've actually achieved that today.
I think we most certainly have, and I think what's powerful about today is that I think what we're talking about is a rising and coming phenomenon. In other words, I don't think we're talking about something that's a kind of interesting sideline. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this kind of stuff in the next 5 years at state and federal level, and I think we're all getting much more canny and a bit more wise about how to do this stuff. And I think Queensland, frankly, is, well, I don't know whether it's leading the way, but it's certainly doing some leading work.
Sounds like IPA's ahead of the curve.
I think IPA Queensland, well, I'm a great fan of IPA Queensland and the people who've been pushing it over the last couple of years. I think the answer is yes. I think they picked a theme and I think they're absolutely in the right space.
Well, thank you so much, Martin, for your reflections. Is there anything else as a final takeaway that you'd like to add for our podcast listeners?
No, I mean, I think we've said most of the things. I mean, the most important thing I think that public servants need to understand here is don't assume that you have to wait for permission to get this stuff started. There were so many examples today, not just in the case studies, but other examples, including from our social entrepreneur, Thomas King, who I think was fabulous, that makes it perfectly plain that, you want to get started, you can get started. And no one's going to stop you.
So being a bit less risk averse?
I think so. And I think being a little less constrained about where you think those risks are going to come from. Because the truth is, if you get going, you do it in good faith, and you do it openly, and you include people, I don't think anyone's going to stop you. People might want you to go faster and further, but they're not going to stop you, and they certainly aren't going to sack you. So, yeah, get on with it. I think the time is ready.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Huge pleasure. Thanks.